New developments tonight in the battle over classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago, including a former national security damage assessment getting underway right now. That's in addition to what we have just learned tonight was a similar effort which began back in May on material handed over in January. At the same time, the former president and his supporters are warning of consequences if prosecutors pursue charges. One is even adding that indictments will, not could or might, but will spark rioting in the streets. John Berman here in for Anderson, and whatever you make of what some critics are calling a thinly veiled threat of political violence, you should know that it comes from a Republican member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the former chairman, in fact, Lindsey Graham, speaking last night to former Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy.
I'll say this. If there's a prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified information after the Clinton debacle, which you presided over and did a hell of a good job, there'll be riots in the streets.
Clinton has never been a president.
Now, the former Judiciary Chair did not follow that remark, saying that, of course, such violence would be wrong.
Was
Instead,
a
he
little
repeated
bit
and
different.
amplified what he said. And on his social media network, the former president reposted several attacks on the FBI and a post of his own in which he appeared to be calling for an uprising within the Bureau. Quoting now, "One of the great agents and others in the FBI going to say, we aren't going to take it anymore." He also demanded to be declared, quote, the rightful winner, unquote, of the 2020 election. And like Senator Graham, he used the 2016 decision not to charge Hillary Clinton as a reference point. Other Republicans had different criticisms.
Well, again, my biggest criticism, and I think the concern of most of the country, is where's the transparency, right? We want to see it. And one thing I was very aggressive about was saying, look, if you're going to take unprecedented action and raid a former president's house, well, you better have a strategy for unprecedented transparency.
So that's New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who is often critical of the former president. It is worth noting one of the two unprecedented aspects of this investigation is just how much the government has made public, sometimes under court order, but still. The other unprecedented aspect of it all is that a former president is at the center of it, and what he is saying about it in a supercharged political environment in which there has already been one armed attack so far on the FBI. Tonight, the White House said President Biden will travel to Philadelphia on Thursday for a prime-time address on what is being billed as the continued battle for the soul of the nation. We'll talk more about that tonight. First, the latest on the documents, the court fight over the documents, and the damage assessment being done tonight by the Director of National Intelligence. CNN's Sarah Murray joins us with that. Sarah, what have Justice Department officials said about their initial review of the documents seized at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, John, it was clear from a court filing today that the Justice Department has already begun digging through these documents that they seized from this search in Mar-a-Lago. They're using a filter team, and what they said in the court filing is they have discovered a limited set of materials that could contain, attorney-client privilege information, that the filter team has uncovered that. Now, even though this process has already been underway, this review has already been underway, the Trump team still wants a special master, essentially an independent lawyer involved in this review. They feel like they don't believe they can trust the Justice Department.
He has no
team.
merit for that.
Said she's considering that, she's open to that, and she's going to be holding a hearing on that issue on Thursday.
So what else can you tell us about the damage assessment being done by the intelligence community regarding the documents recovered at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, of course, there's been a lot of concern about the sensitivity of these documents, how they were handled, and what could potentially happen if they had gotten into the wrong hands. So the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, did make it clear to Congress that the intelligence community is conducting this damage assessment. This is essentially a national security assessment about what would be the national security risk if these documents were exposed. We're also learning, my colleagues are reporting, that intelligence officials, along with the FBI, have been looking into some of these documents that they previously got. Remember that tranche of 15 boxes the National Archives previously got from Mar-a-Lago? They've been sifting through those, looking at materials that were marked classified and trying to determine what the actual classification levels of these documents were. Were any of them perhaps declassified? And are there any steps that the intelligence community needed to take at that point to try to protect sources and methods? So in many ways, this effort has already begun, John.
Sarah Murray, thank you as always for your reporting. Some perspective now from CNN senior law enforcement analyst and former deputy director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero, who served as counsel at the Justice Department to Assistant Attorney General for National Security, also with us CNN political analyst and Axios managing editor Margaret Talev. So, Andrew, in terms of this damage assessment, how will DNI Haynes go about evaluating the national security risks posed by the former president having classified and top-secret documents at Mar-a-Lago?
So the folks operating under DNI Haynes' authority are going to look through every one of those documents, and they're going to figure out what is the home agency that made the original classification of that document. And then they're going to go back to that home agency, whether that's CIA or FBI or NSA, whoever that might be, and ask them to review each of those documents individually to say, do you feel you have sources in jeopardy as by virtue of the release of or the poor storage of these documents, or has it potentially compromised a technical intelligence collection opportunity? And they're going to wait to see what those home agencies report back. And with all that, they'll have an assessment as to how much damage has actually been done.
So, Andy, and as Sarah just reported, the intelligence community's review of these documents began back in May, specifically to determine whether any immediate efforts needed to be made to protect methods and sources. So how will those determinations be made, do you think?
So, John, that's a reference to the first 15 boxes of information, which we now know by virtue of the letter from the National Archives that was revealed last week. With those boxes were officially turned over to the FBI on or about May 12th of this year. So the FBI went through a process just like the one I just described to you. The Bureau would have looked through all those materials, pulled out, of course, those that are FBI documents or things that were classified in the course of FBI investigations, and then, of course, handed out the others. So any CIA materials, NSA materials that are in there, those would have been sent back to those home agencies, and they would have then compiled the results of that classification review and that damage assessment.
So, Kerry, separate issue, I should say here. The fact that the Justice Department has come forward and said it has already basically completed its initial review of the documents seized at Mar-a-Lago for issues of privilege, does it make it less likely that the judge will agree to the former president's request for a special master?
Well, I think it weakens the argument for the special master for sure. So not sure which way the judge is going to go on this. The judge has already indicated perhaps a lean towards being inclined to grant the special master. But the fact that the Justice Department has already gone through these, and as we know from the portion of the affidavit that was released, had laid out a team process, so a separate team, separate from the main investigative team, that was designed to review privileged materials, which is a standard practice when they think that they may encounter attorney-client privileged materials. And so I think the fact that they've already gone through them, they've employed that team, they had advised the judge who approved the warrant in advance that they would use that team, really makes the arguments in favor of a special master much less strong, and they weren't very strong arguments to begin with, John.
So, Margaret, Lindsey Graham, the former chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, with his statement saying that there will be riots in the streets if the former president is prosecuted. What do you make of that statement?
Well, John, Senator Graham and his team have said, he's just predicting what he's concerned could happen, but clearly there are a lot of people who are in the political world or the national security world who say, hey, that's not enough. That Senator Graham has an obligation as a member of the Senate, as a steward of good governance, to insist upon the rule of law, to preemptively condemn any violence, to defend the legitimacy of the work that the FBI is doing. And clearly, if every Republican leadership, came out and said, you have to let the FBI do its job, there would probably be less of a chance of any kind of a repeat of January the 6th. I also want to say, Kerry and Andy, better experts on this than I am, but watch the special master argument unfolding later this week. It's very important. This is not just a matter of a third party having a look at it. The implications of the special master's involvement could go straight to one of the former president's favorite playbooks, which is to run out the clock and to delay, to some extent block the government from being able to handle the information that's already got. So there's a lot going on here, and Senator Graham is not a totally uninterested bystander. In addition to being an important ally at times of former President Trump, he has also been actively trying to make it so that he does not have to testify to a grand jury in Georgia in that election interference case.
He's got separate things going on completely. Carrie, the comments from Senator Graham, how will they be viewed within the Justice Department?
Well, Senator Graham is on the Judiciary Committee, so the Justice Department always pays attention to what he and other members of their oversight committee say. But the way that I look at Senator Graham's statements are from the perspective of the Justice Department, including the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, actually have responsibilities to conduct assessments regarding acts of political violence or domestic violent extremism. And so Senator Graham is in a position where he could actually turn to the executive branch and say, is this something that you are learning about in the course of your investigative and your analytical national security and homeland security responsibilities? What concerns me is that that doesn't appear to be what he's doing. Instead, he's just sort of saying this might be something that happens. And so the difficulty is that when there's a legislator who is quite knowledgeable about matters of the Justice Department, quite knowledgeable about national security and foreign policy, speaking about threats to homeland security that are not grounded in actual analytical assessment, then that can have a damaging effect both on assessments that are made in the future about homeland security threats, as well as just really confusing the public about what the status of political violence is in the country right now.
And Andy, a bit of news just in. We just